The Secret Code of Love. Chapter 1, The Cipher of Destiny. Bletchley Park, England 1942. Evelyn Carter adjusted her glasses and pressed her fingers to her temples. The rows of letters and numbers before her blurred slightly, but she refused to let fatigue win. The dimly lit code-breaking room smelled of ink, paper, and the ever-present scent of burnt coffee. A dozen other cryptographers hunched over their desks, pencils scratching furiously as they worked to decipher the intercepted German enigma transmissions. She shifted in her chair and read the message again. Something about it sent a chill down her spine. U-boat movements. High priority attack. Eastern coast. Her heart pounded. If she was right, this wasn't just another routine message. This could mean disaster for British supply lines and hundreds of lives lost. Evelyn stood abruptly, snatching up her translation, and hurried toward the commander's office. Her heels clicked against the floor, and a few male colleagues glanced up from their desks. Most of them barely acknowledged her existence. Bletchley Park was a man's world, and women like her were often overlooked, no matter how brilliant they were. She knocked firmly on the door. Enter. Commander Alistair Finch barely looked up as she stepped inside. The aging officer, a man with deep-set eyes and an air of permanent exhaustion, glanced at her paper. Another decrypted message, he asked, rubbing his temples. Not just any message, sir. Evelyn handed him the paper. If my analysis is correct, this refers to an imminent Luftwaffe bombing run, coordinated with U-boat movements. The eastern coast could be a target within days. Finch's gaze sharpened. Are you certain? Yes, sir. She swallowed. I ran it through 3 separate decryptions to confirm. Finch exhaled, his fingers drumming against the desk. This needs immediate attention. We'll inform the Royal Air Force. He hesitated. And you, Miss Carter, have done well. Evelyn's chest tightened. A rare compliment. I'll have an RAF officer dispatched for briefing, Finch continued. Now, return to your work. Evelyn nodded and turned to leave, but as she reached the door, Finch added, and, Carter, don't get any ideas about involving yourself further. Your role is here, at your desk. She clenched her fists. No matter how valuable her work was, she would always be just a cipher clerk in the eyes of men like Finch. She was still fuming when, an hour later, a commotion rippled through the code-breaking center. The sound of boots echoed in the narrow hallway, and then, ladies and gentlemen, a deep, confident voice carried through the room, I do hope I haven't kept you waiting. Evelyn turned, and her breath hitched slightly. Standing in the doorway, clad in a crisp RAF uniform, was Squadron Leader James Sinclair. Tall, lean, and exuding effortless charm, he removed his cap and ran a hand through his tousled chestnut hair. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room with amused interest. Evelyn had heard of him. Every woman at Bletchley had. The daring RAF pilot, known for his reckless stunts and maddening grin, had a reputation as a war hero and a heartbreaker. Ah, you must be the geniuses keeping us pilots from getting shot down, Sinclair quipped. I'm honored. A few of the men chuckled, but Evelyn simply folded her arms. She had no patience for flirtatious flyboys. Squadron Leader Sinclair, Commander Finch said, gesturing him forward. Miss Carter is the one who decrypted the transmission. Jamie Sinclair turned his gaze to Evelyn. His smirk deepened as he took her in her sharp eyes, the determined set of her jaw, the way she held her ground when most women would blush under his attention. Well, well. A lady codebreaker. I must say, I expected someone. He let his gaze flicker over her plain navy skirt and tightly pinned up auburn hair. A little less formidable. Evelyn met his smirk with an icy stare. And I expected an RAF officer who didn't waltz in like a matinee idol. A stunned silence followed. Then, to her surprise, Sinclair laughed, a rich, genuine sound. Touché, Miss Carter. Finch sighed. Enough. Sinclair, you'll take this intelligence straight to HQ. We need to act immediately. The pilot nodded, but his gaze lingered on Evelyn. Chapter 2, Dangerous Missions and Hidden Desires. Bletchley Park, England 1942. Evelyn Carter sat at her desk, fingers clenched around her pencil, watching Squadron Leader James Sinclair through narrowed eyes. He was still smirking as he schemed the decrypted message she had risked her reputation to bring forward. Arrogant flyboy, she thought. He finally looked up, his piercing blue gaze locking onto hers. Impressive work, Miss Carter. Your code breaking may just keep me from being blown out of the sky. Evelyn arched a brow. Then perhaps you should take it more seriously. Commander Finch cleared his throat. Sinclair, you're to deliver this intelligence directly to Air Command. They'll prepare a counterstrike. Jamie gave a lazy salute. Understood, sir. He turned back to Evelyn. Any last-minute words of encouragement, Miss Carter? She met his gaze steadily. Yes. Don't get yourself killed. For the briefest second, something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe even something softer, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He flashed a grin. Wouldn't dream of it. And then, just like that, he was gone. Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and forced herself to focus on the next string of coded transmissions. It was better this way. She was just a cryptographer, and Jamie Sinclair was a reckless pilot who would likely be dead within the year. She had no business caring. Hours later, RAF Base, England. Jamie climbed into the cockpit of his Spitfire, adjusting his flight helmet as the engines roared to life. The decryption from Bletchley had confirmed German U-boats were lurking in the channel, preparing to cut off supply routes. His mission was simple: fly to a covered RAF station in France, deliver the intelligence, and get back in one piece. He'd been on countless missions before, dodging enemy fire, surviving by sheer instinct and luck. But for some damn reason, he couldn't get the sharp-eyed codebreaker out of his head. Evelyn Carter. There was something different about her. Most women swooned over him, or at least blushed at his teasing. But not her. She was untouchable. And he found that maddeningly intriguing. Squadron Leader Sinclair, you are cleared for takeoff, the radio crackled. He pushed the throttle forward, feeling the Spitfire surge beneath him. Roger that. As he climbed into the sky, he allowed himself one final thought of Evelyn. I'll be back, sweetheart. Try not to miss me too much. Bletchley Park the next day. Evelyn was exhausted. She had spent the night decoding another batch of intercepted messages, her mind spinning with numbers and letters. She stretched her fingers, glancing at the clock. 7:15 a.m. A commotion erupted near the radio room. Frowning, she rose from her desk and walked toward the murmuring voices. What's happened? She asked one of the junior officers. The young man swallowed. An RAF plane was shot down over France. One of ours. Evelyn's pulse stuttered. She knew before they even spoke the name. Squadron Leader James Sinclair. No confirmation if he survived. Her stomach turned to ice. Her first instinct was to tell herself it didn't matter. He was just another pilot, another soldier lost in the war. But deep inside, she knew the truth. It mattered. It mattered more than she was willing to admit. And she was the only one who could save him. Chapter 3, Behind Enemy Lines. Bletchley Park, England 1942. Evelyn Carter sat frozen at her desk, her mind racing. Shot down. No confirmation if he survived. The words echoed in her head, a dull roar beneath the frantic scratching of pencils and clacking of typewriters around her. Jamie Sinclair had been reckless, infuriating, and entirely too sure of himself. But he was also brilliant, and now he was somewhere in enemy territory, injured, captured, or worse. No. She refused to believe he was dead. She forced herself to focus, her fingers trembling as she reached for the latest intercepted transmissions. The Germans would have reported the downed aircraft. If she could find the right message, she could determine where he had crashed. The hours blurred together as she pored over coded communications. Then, finally, Luftwaffe reports successful engagement near Dieppe. 1 RAF aircraft down. Allied pilot unaccounted for. Patrols sweeping the area. Evelyn's pulse quickened. He's alive. She shot up from her desk and strode to Commander Finch's office, barely knocking before stepping inside. "Sir, I've located the downed pilot." She set the decrypted message before him. "He's near Dieppe, likely in hiding." Finch barely glanced at it. "Miss Carter, we have hundreds of pilots shot down over enemy lines. The resistance will do what they can. He's carrying classified intelligence." She wasn't sure if it was a lie or not, but she didn't care. If the Germans find him, they'll break him and our entire operation could be compromised. That got Finch's attention. He studied her for a long moment before sighing. "What do you propose?" Evelyn hesitated, then took a breath. "Send me." Finch barked out a laugh. "You? Absolutely not." She clenched her fists. "I speak fluent French. I understand enemy codes better than anyone here. If I can make contact with the resistance, I can locate him before the Germans do." Finch's expression darkened. "This is not your fight, Carter." Her jaw tightened. "It is now." Occupied France 3 days later. The night air was damp as Evelyn crouched behind a crumbling stone wall, her heart hammering. The resistance contact had led her to the outskirts of Dieppe, where rumors of a downed RAF pilot had spread. Now she waited, gripping the small pistol she'd been given. She had never fired a weapon before. She prayed she wouldn't have to tonight. A branch snapped behind her. She whirled, raising the pistol. "Bloody hell, Carter!" a hoarse voice rasped. "Put that thing down before you shoot me." Evelyn nearly collapsed from relief. Jamie stood before her, his uniform tattered, dirt and blood streaked across his face. He swayed slightly, his right arm cradled against his side. "You're hurt," she breathed, lowering the gun. Jamie smirked despite himself. "Took a bit of a rough landing. But I'd say my rescuer makes up for it." Evelyn stepped closer, her pulse hammering. "We need to move. The Germans are searching for you." Jamie's smirk faltered. "Why are you here?" She met his gaze. "Because I couldn't let them take you." Something shifted between them, something dangerous and undeniable. Jamie swallowed, his blue eyes darkening. "Remind me to let you rescue me more often, Carter." She rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the small smile tugging at her lips. For now, they had to survive. Later, she would figure out what this feeling meant. Chapter 4, Love in the Shadows. Occupied France 1942. Evelyn tightened her grip on Jamie's arm as they moved through the darkened forest. His breathing was ragged, his steps uneven. He was hurt worse than he let on, but there was no time to stop. German patrols would be sweeping the area soon. "You're slowing down," she whispered. Jamie shot her a lopsided grin, though exhaustion lined his face. "Apologies, Carter. Next time I'll try not to get shot before a moonlit stroll." Evelyn fought the urge to roll her eyes. "You're impossible. Yet you still came after me." His voice was softer this time. She didn't respond. She couldn't. They reached the small stone cottage the resistance had secured for them, a temporary hideout, before they could arrange passage back to England. Evelyn guided Jamie inside, helping him ease onto a wooden chair. The space was sparse, just a cot, a small table, and a flickering oil lamp. She pulled a medical kit from her satchel and knelt beside him. "Let me see," she said. Jamie hesitated, then shrugged off his torn flight jacket. The fabric of his shirt was stained with blood. Evelyn's breath hitched as she peeled it away, revealing a nasty gash along his ribs. She bit her lip. "This will hurt." Jamie smirked. "I think I'll survive, sweetheart." Evelyn dipped a cloth into the basin of water and pressed it against his wound. Jamie hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. Silence settled between them. A different kind of tension. She was too close enough to feel the heat radiating from him, to see the flicker of something unreadable in his stormy blue eyes. His gaze lingered on her face. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Jamie exhaled. "You barely know me, Carter." Evelyn met his gaze, her fingers stilling against his skin. "Then why does it feel like I do?" A charged silence stretched between them. Jamie lifted a hand, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers lingered. "Evelyn," his voice was barely a whisper. Her heart pounded. She should move away. She should say something logical, something that reminded them both of the war raging outside these walls. Instead, she leaned in. The kiss was slow at first, uncertain. Then, as if a dam had broken, Jamie pulled her closer, deepening it. His hands cupped her face, his touch rough and desperate. Evelyn melted against him, her carefully built walls crumbling. For once, she wasn't just the brilliant codebreaker, the woman always overlooked. For once, she was simply his. A loud knock at the door shattered the moment. They jerked apart, breathing heavily. Jamie reached for his pistol. Evelyn grabbed the satchel. A voice hissed through the door. "You must leave. Now. The Germans are coming." Their brief moment of passion was over. Now, it was a fight for survival. Chapter 5, The Betrayal and the Escape. Occupied France 1942. The urgent knock at the door sent a jolt of fear through Evelyn's veins. Jamie was already on his feet, his pistol raised, though she could see the strain in his body from his wound. A voice came through the wooden door in hushed French. "You must leave. Now. The Germans are searching the village." Evelyn recognized the voice. Matthew, their resistance contact. She unlatched the door just enough to see his face, shadowed by the flickering oil lamp. His dark eyes were sharp with urgency. "They've been tipped off," he whispered. "A patrol is coming." Jamie swore under his breath. "How the hell did they know we were here?" Evelyn's stomach twisted. Someone had betrayed them. Matthew handed her a folded map. "This will lead you to the rendezvous point. There's a safe house near Rouen where you can hide until we arrange passage to England." Jamie tucked the pistol into his waistband and nodded. "Let's move." They slipped into the night, following the narrow path through the forest. The air was thick with damp earth and the distant hum of enemy vehicles in the village. Jamie walked beside her, his movements tense. "Someone sold us out." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I know." They reached the edge of the woods and crouched near an old barn. Jamie's breathing was heavy, the pain from his wound clearly wearing on him. Evelyn reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his arm. "We'll make it," she murmured. Jamie looked at her, his blue eyes dark and unreadable. "You're awfully confident for a woman who just ran into a war zone to save a man she barely knows." She hesitated. "I don't feel like I barely know you anymore." His expression softened just for a moment. Then, a sharp click behind them. "Ne bouges pas. Don't move." They turned slowly. A German soldier stood behind them, his rifle trained on Jamie. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs. How had they found them so fast? The soldier smirked. "We have been expecting you." Betrayal. Someone had led them right into a trap. Jamie tensed beside her, his hand inching toward his pistol. Evelyn knew they had only seconds before the soldier pulled the trigger. So she did the only thing she could. She stepped forward, meeting the soldier's gaze. "And in flawless German," she said. "There's been a mistake." I'm not his ally, I'm his handler. Jamie stiffened beside her. The soldier frowned, his grip tightening on his rifle. What do you mean? Evelyn forced herself to keep her voice steady. I'm an informant for the Reich. I've been tracking this pilot for weeks. She gestured at Jamie with cold precision. He's valuable. You should take him alive. Jamie turned his head, his eyes blazing with betrayal. But she didn't look at him. Because she knew if she didn't convince them, they were both dead. Chapter 6, A Gamble with Fate. The German soldier narrowed his eyes at Evelyn, his grip tightening on his rifle. You claim to be working for us. Evelyn forced herself to remain still, to keep her expression impassive. Yes, she said in crisp German. And if you kill him now, you'll be making a grave mistake. Beside her, Jamie stood frozen, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the betrayal written in her voice. The soldier hesitated, studying her carefully. You have proof. Evelyn's mind raced. My contact in Paris knows me. Check with him. She nodded toward Jamie. Until then, I suggest you take him into custody. The Luftwaffe would be very interested in interrogating a captured British pilot. Jamie's jaw clenched, and she silently prayed he wouldn't do anything reckless. The soldier considered her words, then signaled behind him. 2 more German soldiers emerged from the shadows. Bind the prisoner, he ordered. And bring them both. Evelyn exhaled slowly, keeping her hands at her sides as one of the soldiers roughly seized Jamie, yanking his arms behind his back. He didn't struggle, he knew better, but his sharp blue eyes burned into hers. She could almost hear what he was thinking. What the hell are you doing, Carter? She wished she had time to tell him to trust her. Instead, she turned to the officer. Where are you taking us? He smirked. To the outpost in the village. If you are telling the truth, you will have nothing to fear. Evelyn swallowed hard. She had bought them time, but not much. Inside the enemy's grasp. The German outpost was set inside a commandeered farmhouse, its stone walls covered in the Reich's insignia. The soldiers shoved Jamie onto a chair, his hands still bound. Evelyn stood tall, hiding the tremor in her hands. She had to think fast. The officer circled her. If you are truly one of us, you won't mind answering some questions. She nodded. Of course. The officer gestured to Jamie. First, tell us what you know about this pilot. Evelyn turned to Jamie, willing him to stay quiet. Then she faced the officer and lifted her chin. He's a high-value target, she said smoothly. Air Command trusts him with classified missions. If we interrogate him properly, we can extract information that will turn the tide of the war. The officer seemed pleased. And how do you propose we do that? Evelyn forced herself to smile. Allow me to handle it. Jamie's eyes widened slightly. She prayed he understood. The officer studied her for a moment longer, then laughed. I like you, Fräulein Carter. Very well. But if you fail, he trailed a finger across his throat. Evelyn nodded, ignoring the ice curling in her stomach. The officer turned to his men. Leave us. As soon as the door shut, Evelyn spun toward Jamie, yanking a small knife from the folds of her skirt. His brows shot up as she quickly cut the ropes binding his wrists. Carter. No time, she whispered. There's an escape tunnel in the wine cellar. I saw the map on the officer's desk. Jamie flexed his freed hands, his voice low. You really had me convinced back there. She glanced up at him. Did you ever doubt me? A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. Not for a second. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Evelyn grabbed his hand. Run! The Great Escape! They darted through the farmhouse, slipping into the cellar just as the door burst open behind them. Shouts rang out. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the stone walls. Jamie yanked open the hidden trapdoor Evelyn had spotted and gestured for her to go first. She slid inside, dropping into the tunnel below. Jamie followed, pulling the door shut behind them. They ran. The tunnel was damp and narrow, the air thick with dust and desperation. Finally, they emerged into the woods outside the village, gasping for breath. Jamie turned to her, his face half illuminated by the moonlight. "You saved my life," he said. Evelyn let out a shaky breath. "Twice now." Jamie took a step closer. His hand brushed her cheek, his touch warm despite the night's chill. "You're full of surprises, Carter." She smiled. "And you're reckless." His lips quirked. "Makes us even, then." Then, without hesitation, he kissed her. This time, there was no urgency of war, no impending danger, just them, standing in the moonlight, stealing a moment that shouldn't exist. Evelyn melted into him, knowing that tomorrow, they would have to run again. But for now, they had won. Together.